Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today I'm breaking down mustache players for Dynasty Fantasy Football. Make sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe if you haven't. Let's go. Our first one, Foreman, and I talk about him because there's a little bit of news, which we'll get into. But first, let's look at what Foreman's done the last 3 years after he came back from his Achilles injury a few years back. So in 2021, he played for the Titans in relief of Derrick Henry, 133 carries, 566 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4.3 yards a carry, and 9 catches for 123 yards. Then in 2022, he was again a backup, but once Christian McCaffrey was traded, he became a starter. 203 carries, 914 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4.5 yards a carry, and 5 catches for 26 yards. And then last year for Chicago, he mixed in at times 109 carries, 425 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3.9 yards a carry, 11 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. So he was weird. He was the starter, and then he wasn't the starter, and then he was an inactive, and then he was the starter again. Very strange. But he's been good as a fill-in back for the last 3 years. Now, the current situation is that Nick Chubb has no timeline to return. I have no idea when he's going to return. I'm not predicting him to play week 1. Jerome Ford was the starter last year. He's a bit inexperienced as a starter. Foreman is 28 years old. And I think that he could have a path to the same role that he had at times over the last 3 years. So on Keep Trade Cut, he's running back 77. I have him running back 76. But it's less about that, the rank among running backs. It's more about the fact that in Dynasty, these types of running backs, a wide receiver in that range, you have no idea when you're going to want to put them in the lineup, right? How are you going to know? But a running back, you're going to know. So I love putting running backs like this on the bottom of my Dynasty roster, even if they're older. I don't care as much about the age. Now, to close out my discussion on Foreman, he was not great in 2023. That's true. But he still earned a starting role at times against Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, neither of whom are terrible. And the Browns this year have a solid offense with a need to run the ball because Deshaun Watson has been not so great. So there'll be a role for Foreman. Kareem Hunt was fantasy relevant at times last year. Could Foreman this year not do what Kareem Hunt did last year? So that's kind of my closeout on Foreman. Next up, Jake Browning. And I feel like we talk about a quarterback every time I do mustache players here, because in Superflex, these types of players are the best stash players. In 2023, filling in for Joe Burrow, Jake Browning was great. 70.4% completion. That's really good. 12 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. Solid. 8 yards per passing attempt. That's up there with the best. 27 carries, 127 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So not exactly a rushing threat, but he did score 3 rushing touchdowns. Not sure that's something to focus on too much. Of course, we know the Bengals have excellent weapons in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Jermaine Burton, a great trio of wide receivers. And Joe Burrow has the wrist injury. I think he's fine. I think concerns about that are overblown. But we know that quarterbacks get hurt. And Browning has already proven that he can step in and play well. Now, Keep Trade Cut has him quarterback 44. I have him quarterback 42, 2 spots higher. I just think that he's proven that he's good. And a lot of other quarterbacks in that range, not so much. Now, to close out on Jake Browning, he was excellent in 2023 as a fill-in. The main issue that he's not higher is that he was an exclusive rights free agent. So the Bengals were able to keep him for 2024 and 2025 on a minimum deal. And he's already like 28 years old. So I don't really see any path that Jake Browning becomes a starter ever. But these types of players like Jameis Winston, Jake Browning, they're probably never going to be starters again, but they always have value because we know if they go in, you'll be able to start them at least as a quarterback too. So for those reasons, I recommend stashing Jake Browning. Now, if you want to see all of my Dynasty rankings and you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and the ability to ask in advance questions for these YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month, and all support goes to making my independent content exist and to the creation of independent content that's not controlled by large corporations or editors, which, unfortunately often edit content and don't let creators say what they want to say. But independent content requires independent support to exist. I have noticed that a lot of people have signed up for the Patreon since I started promoting it on the YouTube channel more. I think people are starting to realize how important it is to me and how the Patreon is my central product. And the YouTube exists because the Patreon wills the YouTube to exist. It's not the other way around. So I really appreciate everyone who signs up for the Patreon because that is what keeps the YouTube channel going. With that said, let's get into our next player. Elijah Mitchell. So there was a lot of talk about Elijah Mitchell this week, specifically that he's the clear backup to Christian McCaffrey. And I guess I shouldn't be that surprised because he's been pretty good over the last 3 years. In 2021, he was the starter for the 49ers, and he was great. 207 carries, 963 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4.7 yards a carry, 19 catches, 137 yards and touchdown in 11 games. But we should learn a lesson from Elijah Mitchell. He went into 2022 as the projected starter. Christian McCaffrey was not there yet, but Elijah Mitchell suffered an injury. And then the 49ers traded for Christian McCaffrey. And of course, Elijah Mitchell has never really been relevant again because Christian McCaffrey has played all the games, essentially, maybe -1. But players like this who have high value are vulnerable to additions coming in. But now we can see that Mitchell in limited opportunity was pretty good in 2022, 6.2 yards a carry. And then 2023, as Christian McCaffrey's handcuffed, 75 carries, 281 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.7 yards a carry, just 6 catches. Wasn't really all that great last year. So it sucks. This was a starter who was good, but since he didn't have the draft capital or the level of investment, at the first moment he got injured, he was replaced. But now he might be even undervalued. He's the handcuff to Christian McCaffrey. He's ahead of Isaac Guerendo. Guerendo has seemingly had like a torrid camp. It hadn't been so good. I think Guerendo is running behind Jordan Mason at the moment. And there's also Cody Schrader in the mix, a UDFA. And Mitchell was solid in a limited role over 2021 to 2023. He's 26 right now, and he'll be a free agent after this season. And yeah, I mean, there's not going to be a better offense, but also a backup to anyone other than CMC will give you at least more of a chance to play. So we'll see if he ever goes in. Now, I have him identically. It's a keep trade cut, running back 68 versus running back 68. But again, it's less about the rank among running backs or the rank specifically, and more about the recommendation that I see a path here. One, Christian McCaffrey injury, and I really hate to even say that out loud because I love Christian McCaffrey. And I don't want Christian McCaffrey to get injured. But if Christian McCaffrey gets injured, we know that Elijah Mitchell will get the first chance to be the starter. We know that. He'd have to hold on to the job. That's not a guarantee, but he'll get the first chance. We know that Kyle Shanahan is actually loyal to these players, maybe even overly so at times. So Mitchell will at least give you some sort of runway in that unfortunate scenario. Now, to close out, again, Mitchell is a handcuff to Christian McCaffrey, and he was good in 2021 and 2022 when playing, although he's literally always hurt. He's never completed a full season. The most games he's ever played in a season is 11 games. So, yeah, but as a handcuff, all you have to do is have him be healthy for the week you need him. So that's really all that matters. Lastly, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I hesitate to even talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire because I'm really not a fan. But, you know, it's he's not as bad, I think, as people think. In 2020, 181 carries, 803 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4.4 yards a carry, 36 catches, 297 yards and touchdown. Now, was he the ultra dominant asset that we wanted? No. Was he bad? No. Then in 2021, struggled with some injuries, but again, kind of similar efficiency, few less catches, but in less playing time. He wasn't bad. Then in 2022, again, he started off the year as the starter, and then he lost the job to Isaiah Pacheco. Still put up 4.3 yards a carry, scored 6 touchdowns. He's not useless, but he was a backup, and Jerick McKinnon kind of eventually stole his thunder even as a backup. And then last year, He really didn't do much of anything. They used Jerick McKinnon more, and Edwards-Helaire had just 70 carries, 3.2 yards a carry. He really didn't look very good. But now, Jerick McKinnon's gone, and there are no other running. It's very strange. It's a very weak running back depth chart. I thought that the Chiefs would bring in another running back to kind of get into the mix, kind of like how the Packers re-signed A.J. Dillon and then drafted Marshawn Lloyd. I thought the Chiefs were re-signing Clyde Edwards-Helaire as their RB3, and they were going to pick an RB2 maybe in the 3rd or 4th round to mix in. But they didn't do that. So they're left with guys like Imani Bailey or whoever their backups are. Just not much there. So for those reasons, I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire 8 spots above Keep Trade Cut ranking, running back 71 versus running back 79. And just to kind of finish off on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's still just 25 years old somehow. I don't understand how that's possible. We want running backs with a path to touches in good offenses. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is probably not a great player, but if Isaiah Pacheco went down, there's no one else. Clyde Edwards-Helaire would be the starter on the Chiefs for some period of time. And he wasn't even awful as a player until last year. 2020 to 2022, he was okay. So these are the types of players, you just hang on to them. Injuries strike when you least expect it. And, obviously, if I had a chance to sell once he actually got on the field, I would love to do that before I even saw it. But that's kind of my theory about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, I do have one piece of news, so let's just jump into that. Juwan Johnson had a foot injury. He had surgery. He'll be out a while. That's never good. They said, hopefully, he'll return for week 1. I don't like that. So usually I don't worry about injuries this far out. I'm not looking at who's leaving camp early, this and that. But this is a surgery. There was a surgery and a foot injury, which always lingers. So for me, Johnson is pretty much off my redraft board. I'm not taking him as a sleeper now. And Taysom Hill, here we go again, is a better sleeper than he was before. So I moved Johnson down in redraft 4 spots, basically just switched him with Taysom Hill, who I moved up 4 spots. And then in Dynasty, I moved him down just 1 spot among tight ends, but about 20 overall spots. Turned 28 in September. Not exactly young. I'm just I think this is just a roster clogger. This is not someone you're ever going to be able to trust. It's a lot of injuries, inconsistent play. It's the same as holding someone like, and probably even worse than holding someone like Hunter Henry, who at least will give you reliable production when he's on the field. So I'm really just not interested in Juwan Johnson anymore. Now, as I said earlier, patrons get to ask advanced questions for the YouTube. I have 3 of those. So let's just jump into those now. First one, do you ever buy cheap 1-year rentals? I have a solid roster, but my RB3 and 4, Spears and Warren. So by looking to acquire a cheap Zach Moss or Eckler, someone in that range. Now, RB3 Spears and RB4 Warren is not bad. I wonder who RB1 and RB2 are, but that's not bad. But typically, no. Typically, no, I don't buy cheap 1-year rentals. They're the worst players in terms of return on investment, and 1 injury and you've lost all their value. So in general, no, not typically my style. I usually look to acquire players in other ways, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the next 2 questions. As far as trading players for picks in a rebuilding league, is it better to trade in season versus preseason? And how does preseason versus in season generally affect the player's value? I'm willing to make a good deal anytime. The best times to make deals are during the startup draft, during the rookie draft, because everyone's active, right before the season starts, and when people need something, whenever that is. In general, though, I don't care that much about timing as long as I'm happy with the trade. I'm going to try to make trades all year round. And lastly, we always talk about trading for or buying starter type players. Can you address building the bench, as in trading lower tiers to upgrade a little at a time? Not how we do it. We don't generally do that through trading lower tiers. Typically, we build the bench in one of 3 ways. Number 1, through acquiring 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks as throw-ins on deals or for lower players that we don't want, and then making those picks to build depth through the rookie draft. Number 2, through acquiring those later picks and then trading them during the rookie draft when there is rookie fever for depth pieces. That's another way you could do it. And then lastly, through getting my stash and sleeper players that I talk about on the YouTube channel as parts of throw-ins on bigger deals. Trading for them directly, people will know what you're doing. But if you get them as a throw-in on a bigger deal, or those extra picks as throw-ins, that way you can build the bench and depth that way, but it's not usually through a bunch of tearing down. That's not usually how I do things. Now, if you liked the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon, where I cover Dynasty, redraft, rookie, start sit, and more. Every sign up helps support my independent content. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.